I'm Scott Kerr, a partner in the corporate department here at Semple Fraser. We thought you might be interested in hearing about a recent transaction we carried out for one of our major clients, Glenmorangie, and so I'm here with some of the Semple Fraser team who worked on it. We've acted for the Glenmorangie company for a number of years, and we're delighted to do so as they're a great client to work for, and their name says it all. They produce Glenmorangie whiskey. They became part of the Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy group in 2005. You can see the attraction to LVMH as the company's two main brands, its Glenmorangie and Ardbeg single malt Scotch whiskies, are leading international brands and provide a good fit with LVMH's portfolio of luxury brands. Glenmorangie is a Highland single malt Scotch whisky. They distill that in Tain, and Ardbeg is acknowledged as the ultimate Islay malt. The Ardbeg distillery there was bought by Glenmorangie about 10 years ago, and prior to that it had been mothballed. In July 2008, Glenmorangie announced it had commenced a 2-year investment programme to refocus its business. It wanted to grow its two highly successful premium single malt brands, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. That was in response to anticipated rapidly increasing worldwide demand. In order to concentrate future activities in the development of these brands, Glenmorangie also announced a phased withdrawal. It wanted to withdraw from its bottling and sale of blended Scotch whisky. As part of that investment programme, they announced the company would relocate its headquarters to Edinburgh and invest in a new made-for-purpose bottling facility. This change in business strategy meant that Glenmorangie would divest itself of ancillary or non-core business, which includes the bottling for third parties. As a result, their existing Broxburn site became too large for Glenmorangie's requirements. The value of the bottling plant and surplus whisky stocks no longer required for the new business model meant that they had a lot of capital tied up in that surplus capacity. A decision was made to sell the existing bottling site and build a new made-for-purpose bottling facility. We have a very good relationship with the directors, and so we were brought in at an early stage before any final plans were made. It was clear it was going to be a big project, so we put together a team bringing in all the areas we knew would be required. Disposal of the existing site, wind down of the non-core business, identifying, purchasing the new bottling plant site, construction of the new plant and the logistics elements, and a new location for the head office and finding a lease for it. As a client relationship partner, I was responsible for ensuring overall coordination, but there's no use pretending I can do everything. That's why we have various experts, and the important thing was making sure all those experts worked as a team. First, we had to identify who would lead each aspect. Margaret McLean, a partner in our commercial property team, dealt with all the property aspects leading to the disposal of the existing Broxburn site. Kirsty Milnes, a director in our construction department, and she dealt with construction issues relating to the new bottling facility. Alex Wotherspoon's in our planning team and dealt with planning issues for the new plant, and Angus McRae was a partner who dealt with the lease of the new HQ office, and Stuart Turner, who's here today, was part of that team. I dealt with contractual issues relating to the exit of the business. So, Margaret, what were the key issues on the disposal?
Diageo was to be the buyer, but as we had to relocate a highly operational business and hadn't yet secured a new site, what Glenmorangie really needed was the flexibility to continue to use its Broxburn bottling facility until its new facility was ready. So we set up a sale and lease back to sell the site to Diageo with a lease back to Glenmorangie, and we built in appropriate break options and extension periods to make sure that the relocation would work to a realistic timetable. The site is primarily freehold, but some of the smaller warehouse buildings are held under leases. It was very important for Diageo that they secured the whole site, including these leased buildings. So as well as having to deal with the sale, we also had to make sure that Glenmorangie's landlords would consent to assign or transfer those leases to Diageo as well. Fortunately, all of the leases contained provisions allowing them to be assigned, but we still needed to tee up the landlords to agree to it all, particularly as we then had to build in the idea that these leases wouldn't transfer until Glenmorangie actually exited the site on a then unknown date, rather than Glenmorangie becoming a subtenant.
Thanks, Margaret. Kirsten, you dealt with the construction elements.
Yes, we worked with the agents appointed by Glenmorangie to find their new site, and once it was acquired, we had to deal with construction contracts, etc. Fortunately, as there wasn't any bank funding, we didn't need to consider collateral warranties and those aspects, but it was important for us to recognise that timing was key for Glenmorangie. We knew there was a small degree of leeway under the Broxburn site leaseback, but that Glenmorangie were keen to implement their new business model as soon as possible, which meant exiting the Broxburn site and relocating to the new purpose-built bottling facility, preferably without extending the lease within the terms of the lease agreement, and definitely before their final lease extension.
Margaret, you also acted in buying the new site, didn't you?
Yes, I did. The land identified was a brownfield site which had been zoned for industrial use, which posed a bit of a problem since we were now going to be setting it up as a production facility with offices. There were also some tricky aspects though to the title, and we had to make sure that we would have necessary access and tie all this in with the planning, which Alex advised on. While the local council were clearly very supportive of Glenmorangie taking over the site, after all it was retaining jobs locally, we did have some serious planning issues to consider. The change of use did appear to be a problem, but it certainly helps if you can work closely with the council and are familiar with their ways of working, which is what we did. And there were also some other unusual aspects. We identified a waste problem as the site needed levelling off, and this was going to be the seller's responsibility. However, we realised that by taking the excess soil from the new site and dumping it onto the site next door, which was still owned by the seller, that could in theory be a transfer of waste. We therefore had to look at that aspect pretty closely to ensure that Glenmorangie wouldn't inadvertently end up contravening the transfer of waste regulations. A pretty obscure point, I know, but that's what we're paid for. In the end, due to some clever design from the quantity surveyors, the levelling of the site meant that no surplus soil had to be taken off site after all. But in highlighting this particular issue to Glenmorangie, they were able to take suitable cost reduction decisions. So that dealt with the new bottling facility, but Glenmorangie also wanted to find a new flagship head office, and they finally identified a new building, the Cube, in the heart of Edinburgh. Stuart, you worked with Angus McRae on the lease there, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. A lovely building and a great location. But we were going in as the first tenants, and so the landlords didn't have a standard style of lease. We couldn't piggyback on negotiations anyone had done before, so we were really starting from scratch. Especially in a new build, it can be tricky to think about all the different issues which might come up, and think through things such as working out rights and obligations for common areas, as they haven't all been identified through existing use.
While all this was going on, Margaret and I, as the partners who worked most closely with Glenmorangie, were keeping a watchful eye on all the different aspects. My team was also looking at how Glenmorangie exited from their existing business. Many of the customer contracts were pretty straightforward, but some were long-term, and we needed to make sure Glenmorangie could get out of them without any issues. We've been involved in putting together many of the long-term contracts for Glenmorangie, and so it was a bit worrying having to look back at your own drafting to check it covered how to get out of them, but fortunately they all worked. The teamwork was essential, both aspects of it, us working as a team together, but also us working as a team with the client. With something this size, and so important to the client, you can't afford to do it any other way.